This would be the composer.
Great, thank you.
We have mics that are...
Testing.
This would be what's his name. All right. Hi. I'm Robert McBride. I'm very happy to be here at this moment and to see all of you in this room at this time. And it's my great honor and pleasure to have a conversation tonight with two extremely talented gentlemen, and as far as I can tell, pretty nice humans too. Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Hi, good evening.
And a man I just met backstage, though I've known of him and his music for many years, and in fact, he's had his music premiered in this room before, Christopher Theofanidis.
Hi.
Who wrote a piece featuring all these percussion instruments, which will be performed for the very first time tonight. How many rehearsals have you been involved with?
Well, so hello everyone, great to be here with you all. So we had 2 rehearsals with the percussionists earlier in the week on Tuesday and Wednesday, and those went on for hours and hours and were great fun. And then with the orchestra starting Thursday, we had basically a full rehearsal, and then we had a dress rehearsal yesterday.
Okay. Now I've heard some composers say they prefer not to be there for the very first rehearsral. What do you think about that?
That would have been a little scary. That was the main rehearsal. So. No, I'm capable of keeping my mouth closed, which is the problem in the first rehearsal, is that the composer usually is going crazy thinking about things and what they want to say. But mostly, you, especially when you have somebody like Maestro here, you can get out of the way a little bit and let them work their magic.
Carlos, this is one of those pieces that's been commissioned by this orchestra and other orchestras and the Aspen Music Festival. And I'm wondering about these co-commission situations and how they come about, or is it different in every case? Is it who knows who?
Well, actually, on our day and age, it's kind of the usual thing that compositions by famous people like Chris are co-commissions. I mean, it just happens that way. In part, I mean, Chris probably can talk more about that. I would imagine that it has something, from our perspective, it has something to simply do with finances, because especially when the piece is a larger piece, it can get slightly expensive. And I can imagine from the perspective of the composer, it's not that the composer doesn't care about finances, but when you actually write a piece that takes quite a chunk of your year, then it's better to have several orchestras because you have the guarantee it's going to be played here, there, and there. I remember, it's just a coincidence, at the beginning of last season, I premiered with the Oregon Symphony a piece by Mark Anthony Turnage here. And I conducted the European premiere 3 weeks ago in Liverpool, and the third orchestra that commissioned it is in Auckland, in New Zealand. So you're covered.
Wow. So is this the first of 6 premieres?
That's right, yeah, six different orchestras.
Go to all of them?
I think 5 of the 6 I'm able to go to, which is going to be great. Oh, me too. And it's actually a personal thrill because my very first professional opportunity was with this orchestra 25 years ago. So I'm very happy to be back with the group, yeah.
And you're from Dallas. Carlos just got back from conducting the Dallas Symphony. Did you have a good time there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun to be there.
Did you wear a cowboy hat?
I actually, I was surprised at the end of my Dallas stay. I said, like, what the hell did I do? I didn't eat a steak, but I'm in Dallas. Well, whatever.
It's one of those places where I've been to the airport, but nowhere else, so it really doesn't count. So you mentioned this big piece taking up a sizable chunk of your year. Did it? How long did it take to write?
About 4 months. I work kind of intensively on a piece at a time, but that was the beginning of the process in a weird way. I mean, I wrote a first draft of the work, then met with Bob Van Cise, for whom this piece is dedicated, and also who made this piece possible in a lot of ways. And his crew, the percussion collective, and I worked together on a couple of iterations of how to, what instruments to use specifically, any changes we wanted to make, and became more like a tailored suit than a kind of impersonal thing.
Did it start with the 4 percussion soloists and then you dealt with the rest of the orchestra?
That's a good question. I basically think very much in terms of melody and harmony and pitch. So for me, it was a bit of a stretch to kind of rethink how I was going to write this piece for them, because I knew that these guys were fantastic on the mallets here. So you'll see 2 sets of marimbas, 2 sets of vibraphones. There are crotales, which are kind of bright glockenspiel-like sounds. They're the vibes, the chimes over there. So there is a lot of pitched percussion in here, which I think is kind of the frame of the piece. That first and the last movement are very heavily in that world. But the internal movements were a stretch for me, and they were great fun to try to figure out kind of rhythmic timing and dialogue between the different instruments. And also very involved are the 3 orchestral percussionists in the back, Neil, Michael, and John. So we have a great sense of conversation that happens between all 7.
Wow, fun. So tell us about this percussion collective. How did you hook up with them?
So I teach at Yale University, and my colleague for many years, not just there, but also at the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore, is Robert Van Cise. And he has the incredibly distinguished career of having taught at Curtis, at Peabody, at Yale, and generations of the creme de la creme of the percussion world. And in fact, here, your timpetist is actually a former student of his. So he had this idea to do a professional collective of something like 20 different percussionists who are in rotation. So in fact, this piece will be done by 6 orchestras and probably, a dozen or so of those players in rotation, which is fantastic. That's so a lot of people learn it simultaneously. It's kind of a great thing.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah. So this is kind of a new idea in a way, and I think we're starting to see it come together. This is one of the early projects that they have, so we're super excited to make that happen.
Carlos, from the conductor's point of view, what was it like learning the piece?
Several things come to mind. One thing that I can tell you is slightly unusual about this wonderful gentleman is his sense of melody. Because, in our day and age, there are a lot of composers who write really maybe good music, but to have a composer whose starting point actually, as he said, is melody, harmony, pitch, is a little bit unusual. Because I have seen and even conducted pieces that have nothing to do with, at least with melody, nothing. They are just sound, and they are kind of impressions of something like harmony, and they create something. And his music, I even told him that this is not the first piece I conduct of his. It's not even the first piece I world premiere of his. I feel very blessed that there was some 2-3 passages in this concerto where I thought, oh, that's Chris. I can recognize his kind of, this is how things go when he's at work.
It's a nice way of saying, there he goes again.
One thing that is unusual for me conducting this piece is actually that I appreciated very much that Chris was in the room for the first rehearsal. We know each other, so I'm sure there is mutual trust. In this case, I really needed him badly, because essentially the position of the conductor in front of an orchestra is always the absolute best you can imagine. It's the best. For this concerto, you have to get a little bit accustomed, because you're not surrounded, the orchestra is not small, but you're not surrounded by your orchestra, you are surrounded by people who hit something. and it makes, because of how he writes and how he uses these instruments, it makes a lot of sound in the sense of ringing, brilliant sound. So we ran the first movement. just to play it, and I kind of smiled and said, well, I will need a little bit help here, because I know the orchestra is playing, but I have no idea what they are doing because I can't hear it. It's not entirely that way. Of course, I made a big drama out of it. But essentially, we spent then quite a bit of time during rehearsals, essentially trying to find the absolute best way to bring forward what Chris wrote, meaning what is on the page and how do I make it come forward.
In fact, I think with every concerto, the central problem is focus and balance, and how it's kind of a lighting design, you need to keep as much as you can the emphasis on the soloist as a primary figure in the drama or in the narrative. And with us it's a little bit particular because there are 4 people, so it's already a little bit diffuse in a sense. And to try to figure out how to do that and get the balance just so the maestro can actually hear the music is part of the rehearsal process, a big part of the rehearsal process, actually.
I've really enjoyed some of the other pieces of yours that I've heard. And on the subject of melody, and Christopher Theofanidis, there's a piece called Rainbow Body, which has been performed a lot and recorded by the Atlanta Symphony. And I remember I played that on the radio, and when I first listened to it, I thought, hey, wait a minute, this is Hildegard. This is Hildegard von Bingen. This is a 12th century melody that you brought into the year 2000 so effectively. What a great idea. Thank you for doing that. I just love that. Are there any things like that in this piece that we might pick up on?
Right, thank you. Robert's referring to a piece that I wrote that uses as its core a Hildegard chant. And one of the things I do in that is that it's like being underwater. When you make a movement underwater, there's a trail behind the actual source that you're doing. Or if you're in a cathedral or something and you make a sound, the sound reverberates. And so in the melodic writing in the orchestra, there's a kind of trace that remains in the air, kind of a natural acoustic that's built into the orchestration. So there's quite a bit of that in here, actually. There are quite a few moments where a line kind of gets smeared in a way and you'll hear the orchestra kind of trailing off and so forth. That's a great fun for me. One of my teachers referred to that when I was much younger as orchestra with the pedal down, meaning kind of the way that a pianist uses the pedal kind of artfully to sustain or to bring some warmth to the sound and to build that into the orchestration a little bit.
Some creative people, like this composer, are able to talk about what they do better than other creative people are able to talk about what they do. And you've made comparisons already in this conversation to lighting design and what things are like underwater. I can tell from titles of some of your pieces that you have some spiritual bent as well. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think if you're not asking some of the big questions, those are things that I think naturally concern all of us and maybe unite us in some way. And, people who are defined in that way, spiritual figures, people who are thinking in those terms are often some of the most thoughtful and poetic, actually, people. And so, have latched on to Hildegard for many pieces, actually, and also to Rumi and to many other figures throughout history that appeal to my sensibilities, and try to find a kind of resonance in what I'm doing with them. Yeah.
Carlos, when you programmed this concert, did you start with Christopher's piece and then, okay, we'll do some Wagner, we'll do some Vaughan Williams, we'll do some Mendelssohn? How did that work?
Sort of, because, essentially the way it worked, we kind of got wind that Chris is writing something like this, and we immediately said, grab. Because my thinking is always, I don't mind to be one of several commissioners, but I want to be number one. Sorry.
The first among equals, Carlos Kalmar.
Yeah, sorry, let me be selfish. And then we put the program around this concerto without really knowing what it will be. Of course, I knew his music, But I mean, who know? You don't know what is coming, and you then receive a score, you read the score, and you say, uh-huh. And there is one funny thing that I have to tell you. I assume you know that. So this is it's a normal score, instruments, and then in the lower middle section there are the 4 percussionists that I read. But for whatever reason, the editor didn't write any instrument for those 4. So I was reading thinking, oh, that looks cute. I have no idea how it will sound and who it will be. It's just a melody, but drums? Well, okay, I knew it was not drums very clearly, but so I was fishing in the dark. And the interesting thing about this concert as a whole is that all of us on the stage are very proud of the entire, I wouldn't call it the idea behind it. The idea is making good music in this case. But what I think you all will experience, because this is, for what I, as the artistic director, bring in front of you, this is a slightly brighter concert, meaning there is, the darkest, if you will, is the Wagner, because it's drama, it's death, and well, you know. But Chris's piece is in that sense unusual, because as concert goers, you have had the pleasure of having Colin Curry here for 3 years, who is an amazing guy, and he's coming back next season. So you had your fair share of compositions for percussion, for one. And of course, it's percussion, so it's like being a child and having 35 toys in front of you, and you want to play everything, and the percussionists run around and all of that. And also, it tends to be noisy. It's a percussion. Not in all senses, but it can. And so I thought, well, it's 4 of them, beware. And it turns out the piece is powerful, but not noisy. And it's absolutely not rude. There is something a little bit more oomph in the 4th movement, because 4 players on drums were not enough, so it has to be 7 of them. Fine. But actually, that's only one aspect. I think of this piece as the focus is actually highly harmonious and melodic, and it's very, it's like, let's see, it probably will make you smile somewhat, because it's a good piece of music. And then you go and you have an intermission, and then comes the Lark Ascending, which takes you literally into the other corner of music, because it's as quiet and as minimal and as chamber music as it gets. And then we have Italian Symphony by Mendelssohn, which I don't need to explain the genius of that one.
Aren't you glad you came to hear this conversation? And I want you to know that Joe Cantrell is videotaping this, and that will be available on the interwebs, YouTube, All Classical's website, Oregon Symphony website, starting later tonight. And so you can tell your friends, if you know anybody who's coming to the concert tomorrow afternoon or Monday, they could check that out.
If I can, because Chris spoke so eloquently about drawing from the old, Hildegard, etc., or kind of being inspired, etc., please remember when you hear tonight's concerts that in the Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams, you have another voice that does somewhat that. It just blows my mind every time I see these creative geniuses at work, and I hear very different ways. Because Vaughan Williams per se was a composer who mostly drew from old folk tunes and all of that, and Lark Ascending in a way is not an exception. And even in the Mendelssohn there is some reminiscence of, I don't know whether you can call it old chant, but this absolutely glorious 2nd movement of the Italian Symphony, which is sort of a processional, reminds you of, oh, you're looking at old processions going to church in Italy in the 7th century or something like that. It's, yeah, but we start with Wagner.
And you can read about all these pieces in your program notes, and I hope you'll do that tonight at some point. You know, the funny thing about the Mendelssohn Italian Symphony, he was never satisfied with it. He conducted it, he revised it, he still didn't like it, didn't want it to be published. I can hardly think of a more perfect piece of music. I wonder what he would have done. I mean, you're a composer? What do you
want to say, you're a composer.
Was he crazy or what?
Well, you know, I don't know. but I will say that if intuitively, the closer you get to something that feels right, the more you want to make it right. You know, so like if you're working on a piece for a long time and it's starting to have that feeling of being just so, you're very aware of things that are not just so. So, I mean, I don't know if Mendelssohn had that feeling or not, but that is kind of what I imagine that to come from. But who knows?
Are you a reviser?
Increasingly, you know, and it's funny because I didn't used to be initially, and what changed that was when I started working on opera. Because opera, suddenly they need 4 minutes so they can do a makeup change, or they need the lead baritone wants a new aria, and you're kind of, whoa, okay, well, I can do that by tomorrow, and and so you become a little bit less precious with the idea of things and the architecture of things, and you realize that the support is still there, and that theoretically your intuition keeps you from letting it collapse. And so I've been doing, and I'm sure there will be some revisions after we have a kind of post-mortem on this experience and that kind of thing. So,
since you're sitting here and part of this conversation, what do you have to say about Wagner and Vaughan Williams and Mendelssohn? Anything? Oh,
yeah. I mean, that's just, I couldn't be happier to be on this program. I love all three of these pieces dearly. You know, there's so much to, every composer has a particular commitment to what they're doing. And some of it's quite innate and natural. And, you know, when you look carefully at the mechanics of Mendelssohn, you know, his interest in counterpoint, the brilliance of sound that he was attracted to, the kind of hushed, lush voicing in Vaughan Williams, the power orchestration in Wagner, you know, what doubling or tripling a brass instrument sounds like. It's empowering. I mean, when I hear these things, I think, wow, I still want to do this. I really want to do it. And that's the same feeling I had when I was, 16, 17 years old and heard Gabrieli or the Mozart Requiem for the first time, and I thought, I want to do that because it just sounds great.
Is that when you started composing?
A few years later. It took me a year or two to kind of figure out that was actually okay.
And actually, for me, this program, the Italian by Mendelssohn has a special meaning because it's a symphony that, for whatever reason, I don't do that often. But it reminds me of something because this is a symphony that got me my very first job. And I yes, thank you, Mendelssohn, thank you.
Well, how so?
I was a very young conductor in the year 1986, and I presented myself to Hamburg Symphony in Germany, and that was the end of the program. And I have no recollection exactly of what I did, no, but I can really, with complete 100% sure that if I would today hear what I did to the music back then, I would say how could you? But they still wanted me as music director.
I think one of the nice things is that all of these pieces, for a lot of musicians especially, and I'm sure for people who are listening, just for passion of listening, they have very specific associations in memory and time, I remember very vividly certain programs that I was on that were meaningful to me, the whole program. I remember what the pieces were, I remember the ordering, who conducted what was exactly there. So there are these kind of memory links to certain pieces which are quite nice like that.
And Sarah Kwok, our concertmaster, who will be the violin soloist in The Lark Ascending, first piece on the second half tonight. It's a very special connection with that piece, which you can read about in your program notes.
And
Thank
sorry, she told me something that I didn't know. Everybody who is, I don't know the English Latin term for experts in birds. She said that she read somewhere the lark is one of the very few birds who sings while flying. Because I mean, go and check it out and send me messages tomorrow that like, oh, come on, stop telling things you don't know about. But she said that, I mean, we know all birds sit, look out, where are the girls, and cheep, cheep, cheep. The lark sometimes sings while flying.
Well, that makes sense.
That makes sense with this piece.
What the violin does in that piece. It's so beautiful. We have to stop. Thank you for being here. You're going to love this concert. Composer, Christopher Theofanidis. Carlos Kalmar.
Robert McBride.
And you. That was good. Thank you.